By way of explaining what we're about to do, I am first going to tell you a little bit about the country called Tibet. In 1950, Communist China invaded Tibet, and while leaving the Dalai Lama nominally in charge, they in fact seized control of the entire country. In 1959, after a Tibetan uprising against the Chinese, the Dalai Lama was forced to flee to India for his life and has lived in exile ever since.
Kundun is a 1997 film covering basically the period of time from when the 14th Dalai Lama was born to when he fled across the border to India. And it is a very underrated film. Now, it's ostensibly a biopic, but it's strange as a biopic because it's less about what happened than it is about how it felt that these things happened. There's a lot of great sort of spiritual moments and messages and bits of dialogue where characters are discussing how that moment is sort of affecting them internally in sort of a side way. It's not quite like direct. It's an interesting, kind of hard to describe film. I think this is a huge contributing factor to why it's not as well remembered as the director's other films, because it's very slow and it's more of a tone poem, to use like a dumb phrase that no one really understands. I just throw it out there because it makes me sound smart. But it's sort of a snapshot, all of these stupid buzzwords. It's just a moment in time that's try to create a mood, and it is unusual, especially for its director, Martin Scorsese. Now these days, of course, Scorsese is best well known for Wolf of Wall Street, Goodfellas, big violent sort of gangstery movies. The Departed, that was the other one I was trying to think of. He's directed all kinds of different movies over the course of his career. But the two films of his that I find the most interesting are also the ones that are talked about the least of his sort of filmography, and it's Kundun and The Last Temptation of Christ. So one of the things that's sort of surprising about Martin Scorsese is that he comes from a very Catholic background. And unlike a lot of directors who come from a religious place, he doesn't seem to resent his religious upbringing. He seems to be a very spiritual person, which is, not something that you would expect from somebody who directed Goodfellas. Now, Last Temptation of Christ, when it came out, was very controversial because its sort of pivotal sequence is Jesus on the cross being tempted with the promise of a normal life for the rest of his life. Sort of, this is what your lifetime would look like if you didn't sacrifice yourself on the cross. But anyway, you watch The Last Temptation of Christ now, and it's a very respectful film that explores the psychology of Jesus in a way that not a lot of other movies have done, because they don't really treat him like a person. Kundun is very similar. It's a very respectful, spiritual film that's treating the 14th Dalai Lama as a human being and exploring the sort of spiritual existential ramifications of the fact that he exists, but not really calling into question the legitimacy of the spiritual element of this person's existence, because that's not really his place for that story. Stylistically, there's an incredible use of music that I feel is very atypical for this sort of film, where instead of being uplifting or inspiring, it's sort of foreboding. You're not entirely sure how to feel about what you're seeing, and it really imparts a sense of awesomeness in the traditional definition of the word as something which gives you awe. You have this monk sort of realizing that this child is the reincarnated Dalai Lama, and this music is sort of expressing just how important and incredible that moment is. So again, Kundun is kind of hard to summarize because it's not really about what happens. But for our purposes, the more interesting thing is the production. So Kundun is written by Melissa Matheson, who is best known for writing E.T. So here is a white woman writing a film about a slice of history in Tibet, a very important slice covering a very important historical figure who is still alive. And the person who would eventually go on to direct it is a white American who is best known for extraordinary violence and vulgarity. So it's a recipe for disaster. Not to mention the fact that it's written in English and performed in English, which is sort of strange the first time you watch it, because you're looking at all of these people in Tibet and they're speaking English, and your brain has to do... At this point, I'm sort of used to foreign films, and I kind of forget that this is an American production. But here's why it did work. And let's remember that this was made in 1997, and I think a lot of today's productions could take a bit of wisdom from this film. Melissa Matheson didn't just decide to write a film about the 14th Dalai Lama. She approached him and asked his permission, and not only did he give his blessing, he cooperated with her and with the production going forward. In the documentary In Search of Kundun, there's a great moment where they describe taking to him the blueprints they have for the sets that they're working on, and the Dalai Lama looking at them and moving rooms around and writing notes on the blueprints and saying, no, this hallway was here, this room was there, so that the architecture would actually be historically accurate. The production design was very, very bent around historical accuracy. So they looked at all the pictures that exist of the capital of Tibet at the time and recreated it to the best of their ability. And of course, there's no access to those places today, especially not for filming an American film. Perhaps more impressive to me is the fact that all of the actors in Kundun are Tibetan. Not only are they all either Tibetan refugees or children of refugees, many of them are related to the people that this film is about. One of the assistants to the production is the sister-in-law of the Dalai Lama. One of the children who played the Dalai Lama as a child was himself recognized as a reincarnated Lama. It's wild. So for most of these actors, it's been so long since they've seen their home, since they've seen these spiritually important places that they barely remember them. And for many of their children, these things are just stories, and they have no sense of Tibet as a place that really exists. There's this great story about an extra who was being fitted for costumes, and she looked at their opulence and she said,
in olden Tibet, did they really have such, grand costumes? Did these things really exist? She didn't have any idea of what it was like.
During filming and after it was over, many of the actors described almost a sort of spiritual or cultural renewal, because the sets and the costumes were so true to life that it was bringing them back to this world that they thought they would never see again. And even though it was just a facsimile, it was real for them, and it served a very important purpose in giving them some sense of ownership of their culture back, even if just for, a brief moment. So yeah, besides being just a really good movie with lots of great performances and having a really good script and just being a really emotional film, historically it's very important, and I think is a great example of how American filmmakers and writers can create the circumstances for a very culturally appropriate and even empowering film. So if you're wanting to get a sense of Martin Scorsese's other side, you should check out Kundun, and it'll be a very good movie that might convince you that Buddhism is the way.
First, one understands that he causes much of his own suffering needlessly. Second, he looks for the reasons for this in his own life. To look is to have confidence in one's own ability to end the suffering. Finally, a wish arises to find a path to peace. For all beings desire happiness. All wish to find their purest selves.
Hello and thank you for watching this video. First up, special thanks to my $10 a month patrons, Amy Mims, Logan McQuiston, Richard Daly, and Austin McCauley. Wow, look at those names. You even heard my voice say them to you directly at your home. If you would also like to hear your voice spoken out loud and then put for public viewing in a video, you can give me $10 a month at patreon.com/LTAS. For $5 a month, you get access to my notes and unused materials and the scripts that I write for these videos. My current patrons have helped me to acquire a lot of research materials for my next big video series, and I'll give you 5 guesses as to what the subject of that video series is going to be about. My links to everything will be down below in the description. Otherwise, thanks as always for watching, and I'll see you again eventually. Maybe. We'll see, right?